Hey guys, I just finished interviewing the author Nicholas Eames, author of Kings of the Wild and Bloody Rose. Before we get into that part of the video, make sure to like and subscribe to see more videos like this. Let's get into it. All right. Hey, Nicholas, thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Before we get into these great books I have in front of me, would you want to, or do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and where you came from and how you got into writing?
Sure. Well, my name is Nicholas Eames. I'm an author. I live in Canada. I was born and raised in Ontario, and then eventually moved to Vancouver, which is where I kind of finally started like writing
Mhm.
books. Um, and yeah, I kind of started reading at a very young age. Got into it as many people do with Lord of the Rings, and uh, and then yeah, started writing a little bit in high school, and then after I went to college and started to just yeah in my about I think I was 25 years old when I decided I was going to write a book, and luckily it all worked out in the end, but it took a long time to get there.
Yeah. So where'd you go to college at?
I went to Algonquin in Ottawa, but I went for theater arts, so nothing writing
Oh,
related whatsoever. But
really?
I like to think that a background in theater kind of helped when it comes to
Mm.
like dialogue or imagining scenes or how people would say things or sigh between sentences and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
What made you want to do the theater arts?
Well, I wanted to be Tom Cruise because obviously we're pretty much identical twins. No, I just loved that. I love movies. I loved acting in
Mm.
general. I did it in high school a lot. I went to like a very like theater forward high school where we would spend about like 17 grand every 2 years on our like
Oh,
on a big theater production. Um, so yeah, I just kind of went from that, and I did meet like my lifelong friends in college, and
mm.
the guy that kind of got me back into when I got out of writing. I met a buddy there who I just got to hang out out with when I was in Vancouver the other day, who was also into like books and writing, and so together we kind of got back into writing, and yeah, thankfully I did.
Did they teach you about like screenwriting in the theater arts and that's what you meant like helping with dialogue?
No, not at all. In fact, I didn't even have a binder for 2 years of college, and I was told by my teacher that I had to get one. I'm like, oh no, I've got a pretty good memory, but it just wasn't that kind of class. No, I just think as far as like, say when you're acting or you go to like act out a scene and you're like,
Uh,
where should I pause here? Like, what would this character, like, how would they say it exactly? And I think that kind of helps when you're writing dialogue to just wonder, the emotions that someone might be going through beneath the surface,
mhm.
depending on what they say and what they feel might not be the same thing. So I think just kind of like acting and going through that process can help with that.
Really? That's
Could
cool.
be
So like
wrong, but
yeah, I would imagine that would help with like all that stuff. So what did finally like get you? You said your friend helped get you back into writing?
hmm well, I also, when I was in high school, I once got busted in class writing when I should have been like doing an English assignment. And I had a substitute teacher that day whose family happened to run a gas station near where I lived.
Mhm.
And a guy who frequented that gas station happened to be a guy named Ed Greenwood, who just worked at the local library, but also created Forgotten Realms, which is like the biggest Dungeons and Dragons world that exists.
Oh, wow.
And he was a pretty big writer himself.
Mm,
And this teacher was like, "Well, I can, if you're a writer, I can give some of your work to this guy, see if he'll read it." So
mm.
it's just crazy to think, but he did give 3 chapters that I wrote to this guy, and eventually, about a few months later, I had the substitute teacher again, and he had brought these pages back, and they were fully edited by this author, and it was just really gracious of him. So
Mm.
I was able to thank him years and years and years later, and say that because he wrote me a letter and it said at the top of it that you have the fire of a good storyteller, and
Uh,
those words kind of stuck with me while I was going through theater. But then also while I was going to school, that same buddy who got me back into writing kind of got me hooked on this author named Guy Gavriel Kay,
mm,
who's my favorite author. I had read one of his books in high school for an assignment, book 3 of a trilogy, obviously, which is a terrible place to start. But I had a report due the next day, and I was just like, I needed to read something Canadian, so I just plucked it off the shelf.
mm.
And then it cut to a day later, and I was bawling my eyes out at a book for the first time in my whole life, and I was like,
Really?
what the heck is going on here? So, anyways, she kept reading that author, and I went to see him speak a couple times, and finally, it was just one of his books, a book called Lord of Emperors that I was reading,
Mm,
which is a kind of a book about art and legacy and leaving something behind, whether
mm,
you're an emperor or a artist or a chariot racer or a chef. And while reading that book, there was a very specific page that was so beautifully written and affected me so much that I was like, if I could ever write something that affected someone the way this page has affected me, then that would be a life worth living. And I kind of started writing about a month later.
Dude, that's cool. I've never read any of his works, but just saying that kind of got me interested in that
Yeah, a
book
lot
you
of people
mentioned.
haven't. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
kind of known as, he's often called your favorite author's favorite author, because like Brandon Sanderson calls him one of the only two like geniuses writing fantasy
really.
today. So yeah, his earlier work's a bit like more like raw and fast paced and actiony,
Mm,
and then his later work is very kind of slow and like uh, I don't know, just like contemplative, I guess.
mm,
So I would definitely recommend starting with some of his earlier stuff.
yeah.
But yeah, it's just beautiful and
Do you have
just
like a
gut wrenching.
do you have like a specific book you would recommend from the earlier works?
Yeah, there's two that people often say are the two best to get into. One is called Tigana, which is very, very fantasy. And
Mm.
then the second one is called The Lions of Al Rasan, which,
Oh, I've heard of that one.
yeah, it's also very popular.
Yeah.
And just because he started kind of writing in a world that's kind of like Earth but different, and The
Mm,
Lions of Al Rasan takes place in the setting is like a medieval Spain,
mm,
and his three main characters, one is Christian, one is Jewish, and one is Muslim, but all like clothed in his religions.
yeah.
Um, and you know, yeah, hijinks ensue. But it's just like it's just unbelievably beautiful, unbelievably sad, unbelievably devastating and heartbreaking and
Mhm.
uplifting, and they're just really, really cool.
Yeah. So you also mentioned Lord of the Rings. Would you say Lord of the Rings and also those other books you mentioned are the ones that influence you the most, or are there other ones too?
Yeah, they definitely got me going, but it was more like when I was like a teenager, like Robert Jordan is a big one who's kind of
Mm,
having a resurface and having his heyday. Um, but Joe Abercrombie and Scott Lynch, who wrote, I mean, Joe Abercrombie's one of the most famous fantasy authors in the world, but
yeah.
Scott Lynch is pretty big as well. And he wrote a book called The Lies of Loch Lamora that
Mm,
probably to this day, if I like needed someone to like a book or I would die, I would give them that book because I would stake my life on it. The fact
yeah.
that they would like it.
Mm,
There's some haters out there, but it's just a phenomenal book. And both those books have just like a little bit of humor in them. The authors are humorous people.
mm.
And Joe Abercrombie. Have you ever read Joe Abercrombie before?
No, I just got back into reading this
Yeah,
January. Like the first book I read this year was Red Rising by Pierce Brown, and that got me
awesome.
back into it. And I
Yeah,
have The Devils and the Blade itself on my shelf,
cool.
and I'm trying to get into that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're both great. Two different
yeah,
whole different worlds. But the
yeah.
Blade itself kind of begins as long one. But you'll
Mm,
see. I mean, the Devil's tries a lot more to be funny,
mm,
whereas the other one just he can't help it. Like he will not tell a joke in a paragraph, but there's just
uh,
something darkly humorous in the
yeah.
way he writes. So
That's what I've heard about. Like a lot of his work is like grimdark and a lot like humorous. Now I'm not like
yeah,
I read like Catch 22, so I'm not like I know a little bit about a humorous book, and that
yeah.
kind of does interest me a little bit in that.
Yeah,
So
he's
like,
good. So those authors made me think when I was trying to write my books, which at the time
mm,
were trying to be funnier than any book I'd read, um, made me think, okay, maybe there's a space in fantasy for comedy.
yeah, I feel like there's got to be like a space in like most books for comedy, unless you're trying to tell like a super dark tale.
Totally. And I
Like
don't feel that
it's
there's
such like a big
books.
part of our life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like I just read The Hobbit. I'd watched all the Lord of the Ring movies and I read The Hobbit and I'm trying to
Yeah.
get into the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's like I love those movies. And there's like every time I tried writing my own book right now.
Yeah.
And like I'm like 8 pages in. I had
Yeah.
40 pages and I was like, this sucks. And so I deleted it. And every time I read like a book, I'll read yours. I read Will of the Many. I read a couple other books. I read them and like, man, this is way better than what I'm writing. I'm trying to like pull information from like other people.
Yeah.
So like, would you say that's what like you were doing? Because I think a quote I heard was good authors borrow from other authors and make it into their own. I think I've heard that or somewhere.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, for many years when I first started writing, I was trying to emulate my favorite author, Guy Gabriel Kay, who no
Mm.
human really can emulate because he's the best writer humankind has
Yeah.
ever produced. But I was trying to be like very, very serious and
Mm.
very, very eloquent and very poetic. And although once in a while I've got a few paragraphs that I'm immensely proud of and I think are real tearjerkers, that's just
Mm.
not my voice. It's just not who, it's just not the way I write. And
Yeah.
so I spent about 12 years writing this big fat fantasy novel that will never see the light of day. That was kind of my version of Robert Jordan book meets a Guy Gavriel Kay book meets a Stephen Erickson book. And it wasn't until I finally let that one go and started fresh that I realized that I had my voice there and just not to try to emulate someone else. So I think you can learn a lot from other authors, but ultimately, you're looking to write a book that only you could write. You know, 100 writers could take my idea and wouldn't end up with the same book.
Yeah, that's what like I watched. I know Brandon Sanderson puts out like college courses, and so I watched all those, and it was like you need to write at least 3 books to get your writing style. I was like, dude, I'm on 8 pages. I don't know how I'm gonna get there,
I
but it
think
looks
he
like
likes
so daunting to get into it.
Yeah, he's just trying to make sure people have their expectations kind of in check because it happens. I mean, there was this woman, Rebecca Kwong, who wrote The Poppy War. I'm not sure if you heard about that, but like she was like 19 years old and wrote a bestseller and just bam out of the gate. So it happens, but yeah, obviously in my case, it took me a while.
That is one I definitely want to get into, but what is it? So I saw on your story you posted some about the quarterback show. I know this was a question, and you said something about Joe Burrow. Are you into like the NFL and football?
Oh heck yeah, yeah. I've been a football fan or NFL fan for about it's a little over 20 years now.
Really?
In the very early 2000s, I decided that I was going to get into football. The way I kind of equated it was that football is I'm a huge like history buff. I love like ancient warfare, like Rome and Carthage and all that kind of stuff. And I love the drawings of the battles kind of stuff. When you look at one of those drawings of the old battles, it looks like a football game plan. And so the way I equated it was essentially that your linebackers are like your heavy infantry that are just there to hold the line. Your wide receivers are like your cavalry. You're skirmishing and whoever wins that battle often wins the war, wins the actual battle. And so that's how I kind of made myself get into it. And I think I got the Madden at the time and just played all the teams.
Really?
And I was like, well, these guys got tiger stripes in their helmet. Like, I'm not going to find anyone better than that. So I just picked the Bengals, and it went both well and not well because they were an amazing team for the next like 15 years. But they never won a playoff game ever. Like, they could be the best team in the NFL. First play of the playoffs, their quarterback would go down. So
it was like last year, I was like, they had like the best passing offense, and then their defense was just letting everything go. I was like, oh, bro.
So and then they sucked for 5 years, and then they got Joe Burrow.
I was really hoping they would win that Super Bowl against the Rams. That was like, I'm a Panthers fan, and it's been really rough for the past like 10 years since 2015. But I always hold out hope just to get disappointed every year.
Fair, Well, I have high hopes for this year, but we'll see. How about do you live in Carolina?
Yeah, I live in North Carolina.
So,
that's how I kind of just grew up into it, and I got my roommate that's going to be with me next year. We're both huge Panthers fans. And that stuff. But so like I never thought of it that way, with like equating it with like military warfare with that. I always thought of that with like I'm a big like MMA fan with UFC, and like I always thought of like that's like that's the modern gladiators right there. Those guys are so cool. But and do you want to get into the books now? Or?
Yeah, of course. I should ask one thing before though. Have you ever watched a hockey game?
Hockey game. I have watched a couple. The guy I just talked about, my roommate, huge into hockey, and I've tried to get into it. I like just seeing the dudes start to fight. I was watching the USA versus Canada.
That was a good one.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
I was getting into that. That was cool. And then I do want to get into it more this winter. That was like football, MMA. Those are the only sports I really watch. But I do want to get into hockey. I wish I liked basketball.
Yeah, the Hurricanes are awesome. You got a good team down there, and your guys' fans are like nuts. They're great.
I hear about it a lot. What's your team?
The Ottawa Senators, because I lived closer to Toronto for my whole life, but the first time I ever moved to a city that had its own hockey team was in Ottawa. And also because I'm a fan of ancient Rome, their whole thing is ancient Rome is like their motif. So it was a no-brainer.
That's pretty cool.
I'd probably cheer for them if I lived in, Anaheim. So
do you read like a lot of history books on the ancient warfare and that stuff?
I used to. I don't that much anymore, but I've read a ton of books like Hannibal the Carthaginian, who like fought Rome, is like my favorite historical subject of all time. So I read a ton of that stuff. Anything about ancient Greece. I play a ton of video games that are like historical based. So
I was watching the video on Hannibal, and that dude he was pretty cool. It was like how
So
like
cool.
that dude just defeated the Romans. The
Yeah.
coolest part was him just getting over. He crossed the Alps, didn't he?
Yeah.
Just to beat the Romans. I was like, that was pretty cool. This
Oh, it
guy's
was
awesome.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, we can get into the books now with I got
Let's
one
get into
question.
those books. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was it? So what were the biggest influences in your writing that made it into your books and characters? Like what would you say influenced your characters and the world of the Heartbound? Is that what
Yeah.
we would call it? Okay.
Yeah. Grandel is the name of the world, I think I called it.
Grando, yeah.
But yeah, the Heartwild, anything really works.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it was kind of very much based on music. So like the whole idea was that what if mercenary bands were kind of like rock bands, and it's the kind of idea where you might like you think about that with your friends and laugh and then go, whatever. But then I just thought it was such a cool idea, so I looked it up to see if anyone had done it, and no one had. So I was born in the late 70s, but I did not like really get into like 70s music and classic rock. I had an uncle who really loved it, and it was kind of like a little bit in or around me. But when I started to write this book, I just mainlined 70s rock for 2 years while I wrote it, and read books about it, read autobiographies about it, watched concerts and podcasts and full stuff. And so all that kind of stuff seeped its way into the book. So the characters in the book, especially Kings of the Wyld, the second one moves into like the 80s. But the first one is very much supposed to be like a 70s rock band, who, they're like the main character of the book, the POV character rather, is kind of like the bassist of the group. He's like the quiet guy whose name everyone forgets all the time. And then there's the leader, who's the front man. There's an axe man. There's a guy whose last name is literally Skull Drummer. He's the drummer. And then a wizard named Moog, who is kind of like the pyrotechnics, triangle, flute, whatever guy.
Yeah.
And so I kind of based each of those characters off archetypes of famous rockers and things that they do, like in their past, rather in their youth, like ride horses through caverns and stuff like that, are based on rock stars riding motorcycles through hotels and things like that. So a lot of those stories kind of made it through into the book, and definitely inspired the characters.
I never really noticed the part about Clay, like nobody knowing him, until I got into that part in Bloody Rose, and like, oh, nobody really knows Clay. I was like, oh man, I love him. I was like, that sucks for him. But is there do you have like a favorite rock band that inspired it, or?
Yeah, ultimately in all my, and then I moved obviously to 80s music, which was a bit more, I was more familiar with. And now I'm listening to 90s music for the last five or 6 years.
Wow.
But as far as like 70s bands goes, for me, Led Zeppelin is the ultimate.
Really?
Like, I just love them so much. When they're at their best, I think they are the best, but obviously that's very subjective. A huge fan of the Rolling Stones. The cool thing with bands like the Rolling Stones is that they also made it into the 80s, whereas Led Zeppelin didn't. So you can kind of, when I was writing Bloody Rose, I listened to Keith Richards' autobiography, and a lot of those stories kind of made it into the books as well, and informed how a band acts on the road and stuff like that.
Right. Do you have a favorite Rolling Stones song? I'm a huge fan of them.
Yeah. God, I recently got in an argument with someone not an argument, but like a debate of whether the Rolling Stones are better than the Beatles. And I was like, it's not even close, man. Like the Rolling Stones just have a billion more better songs. And ultimately, it's hard to say. I love Wild Horses, which is on my like unofficial Kings of the Wyld soundtrack. You Can't Always Get What You Want is not only a great song, but a good life lesson. Gimme Shelter, very, very cool. Yeah. What about yourself?
I like Rainbow, because me and my mom both like that one, because we're both in that band. And I like Start Me Up. That's one. I have it in my workout playlist. That's one of my favorite ones to put on while I'm working out. And that's stuff for like Led Zeppelin. I just put on the Immigrant Song and
so good.
Stairway to Heaven. I'll put on like the last 2 minutes of it if I really got to do like a hard set. I was like, I got to get hyped up for this one.
Yeah. I'm also a big fan of like Leonard Skinner. They don't have as many good songs, but they got Freebird, which beats pretty much every other song. And Meatloaf actually was a huge inspiration for the second book.
I've never heard Meatloaf before. Is that
he's good. He had a guy who wrote his songs named Jim Steinman, and he's got these two albums called Battered of Hell 1 and Battered of Hell 2. And Yeah, you'll see if you give them a shot. When the two of them did separate stuff, they were not nearly as good. But when the two of them were together, it's the most over dramatic lyrics, like hard on
Mhm.
my sleeve. I'm just gonna wail my whole like life into this microphone that you'll ever
Mhm.
hear in your whole life. And
Yeah.
so no one quite does it like those
Yeah.
guys. So
No,
those
I
albums are
definitely
great.
know Leonard Skinner though. I got a
Yeah,
lot of their songs on my playlist and that stuff.
yeah.
So, what would you say like most influenced like the world of Grandel, like and other stuff other than just like the characters, like Conthus and then the Heart
Yeah.
Wild and like what I noticed you put like every like monster from fantasy
Yeah.
you're gonna find in this book and all that
Yeah.
stuff. And like what made you want to do that part?
Well, that's a really good question because I mentioned I had spent about 12 years before that writing a book that was very serious, and it was all
Mhm.
about history and culture and war and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And it didn't really have much fantasy. It was inspired by books like Joe Abercrombie, books like George R. R. Martin, which
Mhm.
in the Game of Thrones show, the dragons and the White Walkers are very much more front and center, but in the books
Mhm.
you don't even think about them, like they're just not in there. And
Mhm.
so it's just people, and that's the kind of book that I liked and was popular for about 10 years. Like if you had came to me when I was writing that book and said, why don't you write a book with goblins in it? I'd be like, no, I'm a grown man. I'm not going to write a book with goblins in it. Like that's ludicrous.
Mhm.
Because I certainly wouldn't read one because I'm too cool for that.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I had kind of like gone past that phase, gotten a bit older, and wrote all the other serious stuff that I thought, why don't I just try something that's the opposite of what I've been working on?
Mhm.
Something that has every fantasy monster, that has all the things that I loved that got me into fantasy in the first place. Um, and I'm always trying to get people who don't read fantasy to read fantasy. And so
Mhm.
I try to put it in like an approachable manner. So although I do have like some monsters that I made up, especially at the beginning, I wanted to put in monsters that people might know. Like I wanted my mom to like the book, even if she wasn't my
Mhm.
mom. So it's like centaurs, cyclops, giants,
Mhm.
and when those things are mentioned, especially in the first like 3 chapters, they're kind of almost instantly made fun of or made light of, so
Mhm.
that someone who doesn't really read fantasy goes, okay, like these things are goofy and this guy knows it. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I just kind of wanted to make the world itself as like classic fantasy as I could.
Yeah. That's what
Yeah.
like I read The Hobbit after like this was after watching the whole Game of Thrones show. I want to
Yeah.
read the books. But I was like, it was kind of refreshing to have all this world building with the monsters and that stuff. And then I read your book and I was like, all right, this is pretty cool. I
Yeah.
like all the stuff about it.
Yeah.
And like I do one thing I really liked was your take on the Druins. It kind of
Hmm.
felt like it was like the elves, of Middle Earth, coming from that what was it, that place basically heaven where they came from,
Yeah.
and then but
Yeah.
these guys are just like kind of like evil and just got rabbit ears instead. And I was like,
Yeah.
this is it was a really fresh take, and I really liked it. I
Yeah.
was like, okay, they
Well, thank
enslaved
you.
it instead of like working alongside of it. Where was your
Yeah.
like main inspiration for that? Was it like the elves and that stuff?
Yeah. Well, originally, my I had an ancient empire in there that was kind of like Roman based.
Mhm.
And then when I was in the process of trying to get a literary agent, I had a literary agent who didn't say no, but didn't say yes, and asked to work with me on the book for a while.
Mhm.
And he kind of wanted a lot of the stuff. Like it was funny. He wanted some of the historical stuff changed to fantasy, but some of the fantasy stuff changed back to human. So like I had, their band's manager was an orc,
Mhm.
and he was like, can we just take all these monsters out and just make them people? So now his nickname's the orc, and I never
Mhm.
did change him back. But he wanted some that empire a little bit more fantasy-ish, so that's when I came up with the idea for the druids. And yeah, just I mean, I play a lot of Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy games, and there is a
Mhm.
race of people in there that have bunny ears, so I knew that they could look cool,
Mhm.
um, even if they had bunny ears. And so yeah, I was just like, why don't I make the bad guy have him have bunny ears, just because it just makes
Yeah.
him menacing but kind of goofy
Yeah.
at the same time.
Just has that
Yeah.
little fantastical element to it and
Yeah.
that stuff. So like with the what was I about to say? With the original empire with the Romans, so that was originally gonna be humans?
Yeah. I mean, they were long extinct, and I
Mhm.
don't think you met any of them because it wasn't
Right.
until the book actually got bought
Mhm.
and they asked me to add 50,000 more words, which is
Mhm.
extremely rare. Usually they want
Wow.
you to cut about 20,000 words.
Yeah.
And my agent made me cut 20,000 words before we even sent it out.
Mhm.
But they were just trying something new where they wanted extra big books. So my bad guy originally was just a horde of monsters. I had no bad guy in the book. And
Right.
so I was like, how am I going to add 50,000 words? So I thought, I'll add a bad guy. So I put this character named Last Leaf in, and who didn't exist in the book when it got sold, and just kind of put him throughout the book. And then his whole history and his whole like reason for fighting and what he does became the impetus for like the second book and inevitably the third book as well. So I'm just so lucky that they wanted me to add those words because it made that book and the future books much better.
Yeah. I really did like how you used Last Leaf to kind of like explain the whole history of, the Julians with that, instead of like doing like a whole like, 20 pages in the beginning of the Julians did this and that.
Yeah.
Use it like in those bits and that stuff. And like
Yeah.
that, I thought, the Julians to me were part of my second or my favorite character in the second book was Free Cloud.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is just really cool how they are like immortal, but like, they, used to enslave it, and it just creates a super interesting dynamic with them and the humans.
Yeah.
And that stuff.
Oh,
I
thanks.
thought
I
like,
appreciate you saying so.
what like made you came up with the idea? It's like, okay, did you think like, okay, only able to have one child with like the women, that's a way I'll help them get to closer extinction?
Yeah, I think so. That idea came to me when I had to add the 50,000 words. I had to come up with like kind of like the religion and how that got formed for the humans in my world, and it was kind of based on them. And it's also a great way to come up with like, when someone wants to curse or swear, using those kind of terms is an easy way to do it, and to make your world to world build and
Yeah.
make it your own, instead of just using ours. And so yeah, it was just kind of like I write pretty slow, so in those days I was just feverish trying to make stuff up as fast as I can and write as fast as I could. So yeah, it was just a matter of thinking, oh, this might be cool, this would work, and this would, because by then I knew I had to write a second book, so I was looking for stuff that would help me lead into the second book and tell the whole trilogy ultimately in the end.
So what were like some things that about the first book that you had to cut out? Like, was there anything you really didn't want to cut out, but you think it made it better in the end? Or that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff. I mean, a lot of the changes were for the best. Like I said, that agent that I ended up parting ways with, because he ended up not taking me on after we had worked together. He made me. My original airships were they were very haphazard. They were more like airplanes. They ran on gas. They had propellers. Like Larkspur's airship was kind of like a B-52 bomber. And so he wanted them more kind of like fantasy. So I kind of invented the way they work and all that, the tidal engines, which enabled me to do so many other cool things in the world. So yeah, ultimately I'm glad that change got made. And there's a couple jokes, when you're trying to write a book that's funny, especially when there wasn't very many books that were funny at the time. A lot of the editors are pretty wary. They want to make it close to what came before. So I lucked into finding both an agent and an editor that wanted it the way it was and thought it could work the way it was. But there was a couple jokes in there that they were like, this is just a bit too much. Can you tone it down? Because otherwise it kind of makes the serious stuff seem ridiculous. So, but there was also a couple jokes they wanted out that I stuck to my guns with and kept in there.
Yeah. So was that like when you have to like say, hey, I want to keep this in, isn't that like your agent going to say, hey, he wants to keep this in, and talking with the editor on that?
No, by that point you're pretty much just working with your editor,
really,
or sometimes a copy editor, because your editor is more like they're called the developmental editor. They're the one that like they love the book, they champion the book, they convince their finance people to publish it, and so they want to work with you, and they may change stuff, and you'll debate stuff, and if you really want to keep something, usually you can. And then the copy editor comes along, and they're like kind of like the grammar police, and they're like, say in my book, because I'm Canadian and they let me use Canadian spelling, which is kind of like a mix between American and British. We just kind of cherry pick the best of the best and we just go with that. But sometimes we got worse words. Anyways, one point I spelled, like I used the word burned and the word burnt. And he was like, you got to pick one of these two. And I'm like, no, they're totally different words. And I thought they were going to make me change it, but I basically fought for it. And I was like, burnt is something, if something is burnt to a crisp, it's been destroyed by fire, it's burnt. My toast is burnt. But if you have like a passion that burned inside you, it burned with a D, and you wouldn't say that it's been burnt to a crisp inside you. That is ridiculous. And so like both words to me need to happen. So I fought for that and I won. But there's also cases where I tried to spell the word all right as one word, and they would rather just not publish the book than do that. They will make you change it to all right, like two separate words, which is now I won't even use the word all right because I think it looks stupid spelled in two separate words.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
So like,
yeah. What was your journey to like finding an agent and like an editor and like having to like get published? How did that go for you? And like, how did you start with that?
Yeah, well, I like most people, like when I was writing that first book, when I finished that first book, I researched agents, whether it was just like online, Googling it, or I would go to the bookstore and I would look in the acknowledgement section of books that I loved or that were similar to mine and see where they thanked their agent, and then look up that agent and see what they were looking for, and then send it out. You have to write like a query letter, and I would send it out. And I got a few people would ask to see, the rest of the book, but I got rejected, probably 30 times the first time I sent it out, and 30 times the second time I sent it out. And so when I was writing Kings of the Wyld, I had that agent who had not taken my previous book, but liked it enough to say he would look at this one. So I just sent it to him first, and we worked on it for about 3 months. And before he said, I'm going to pass. So by then I was pretty devastated, and I sent it out to about 10 agents. But by then I worked in this restaurant at the time, and one of my favorite authors came into the restaurant. He lived in Vancouver, and I saw his name on the reservation list. His name's Sebastian de Castel. And anyway, so I told him that I was writing a book and that I had this agent interested. And then about 6 months later, he came in again. And by then the agent had passed and the book was done, and he knew it was a pretty good agent. So he thought that if that agent liked it enough to almost take it, that it must be a pretty good book. So he's like, well, you can send it to my agent, but she might say no, because she's rejected all my friends. But I sent it to his agent, and sure enough, I got an email from her about 2 weeks later. And I remember I was with my mom driving to visit my grandma, and I got this email, and I scanned to the bottom to see the part where they say, sorry, but we're just going to pass. And instead it said, we'd like to represent you. So yeah, I was shocked. And then, sorry,
you go first.
I was going to say, once you get the agent, you work with them. I worked with her over the course of the summer, cut 20,000 more words out of the book to make it nice and svelte. And then she would start submitting it to editors. And I think some authors like to hear back, like if an editor says no, but I didn't even know to ask or not to ask. So I just kind of waited. And it took about 4 or 5 months, and we eventually got 2 offers on the book, and one of them was much better than the other one. So we took that one, and the rest is history.
How do you deal with rejection from agencies and that stuff? Does it take a toll on you, or you just move past and be like, there'll always be something else out there?
Yeah, I feel it kind of does, but you kind of, even getting into it, you kind of know by the time you finish your book, you've looked it up and you've heard people talk about rejection lots. It's just kind of part of the game. So I still get Facebook memories to this day that are the day I got my first rejection letter, not knowing that I was in for about 10 more years of them. But yeah, I kind of remained optimistic. And I think for a lot of authors, it just helps to just know, you got to know that it's not a great chance to get published. And however, there is also tons of other avenues, especially these days with self-publishing. So it's never out of the question that you can get published. And just, I loved my life, but outside of that, I worked in restaurants. I loved my friends. I was just a happy person. And I think that I was just an eternal optimist. And so that definitely helped deal with the rejection. And on all that rejection, I think helped just me as a person today when it comes to, for better or worse, when I get bad news, I am upset about it for about an hour, and then I'm just normal. And when I get great news, I am so happy for about an hour, and then it's back to normal. So I think that just kind of helped make me a bit more even keeled.
So how do you take a process, or what do you do to get your writing? Do you have a set time you'll write during a day, or or amount of words you say, hey, I want to write this, and until that I'm not doing anything else? Or
yeah, it kind of varies depending on where you are in a book or in your life and stuff like that. These last couple of years, it's taken me forever to write this third book. So I've tried everything under the sun, writing at night, writing in the morning. When I wrote that first book, obviously I worked at the time. So I would pretty much get up in the morning. I would walk to this coffee shop. I would read for about 20 minutes, and then I would just start writing and hope to just get the juices flowing, and then go home and continue it until I had to go to work. And I aim for about 500 words a day, which is really small for some people, but is a gargantuan amount of words for myself.
Mhm.
It's some people just will rip off thousands of words a day. But once my record is like once I worked for about 17 hours straight and wrote 17,000 words.
Oh,
But
wow.
that's, most people can do that in a lot less time than me. But I don't know.
Mhm.
I'm kind of nitpicky. So
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, it just depends. It works. What different strokes work for everyone.
Mhm. So let me look at another question I have. Oh, and you mentioned about like reading like 20 minutes before. Do you have like what's your favorite genre of books? Is it fantasy or sci-fi?
Yeah, it is fantasy now. I do love sci-fi books, and I love
Mhm.
like once in a while history books. These
Mhm.
days, I kind of only get to read fantasy because I am in the extremely fortunate position that I get sent free books to blurb all the time.
Nice.
So it's awesome, but at the same time, there's the books that you want to read, and you feel that you want to do these people favors, whether they're editors that you may work with in the future, or that you just have met and are good people, and they're also
Mhm.
want to get their careers going. And there's also authors that you have met or admire and want to support. There's new authors whose voices you want to kind of lift up, marginalized authors who you want to get out there. Um, but that also means the books you really want to read get just put in a pile and start gathering dust. So um, yeah, these days I don't have time for history books because I all I read is fantasy. And then there's when I finally can put away books to blurb, I want to read just the fantasy books I want to read, and the occasional sci-fi book in there.
Mhm. Do you have relationships with like other authors, like where y'all help each other out in your writing and that stuff?
Yeah, I mean the people that I debuted with, especially who are from my publisher Orbit, we still refer to ourselves as the class of 17. We were 2017 all published together, and you definitely form like a kinship. And same with the other people from other publishers that year. You're just all in it together, and you're all discovering it together, and you're all trying to stay afloat in publishing after you've been published, which is the hardest part, believe it or not, is just staying relevant and staying kind of even keeled as your book either does well or doesn't do well. So yeah, and all the authors I've met have been amazing, and I've definitely met a couple authors too who have become like incredible mentors and role models for me as well. So yeah, it's been great.
Mhm. Do you also like read a lot of fantasy because you're trying to keep up with what the genre is doing and where it's moving and other stuff, or is it just because you're getting sent the books?
No, totally, you're right, and that's
Mhm.
something I mention to new authors all the time, like where they're aspiring authors. Um,
Mhm.
Reading I think is so important, and it's important to read things that have been published within the last 5 or 10 years, just because I think a lot of people get less so now, but especially in like the teens. Um, People who had grown up reading Robert Jordan and Stephen Erickson, these massive like 1,000-page books, were
Mhm.
writing massive 1,000-page books that didn't like move the plot forward every chapter. And
Mhm.
by then, those books just weren't selling. They just weren't happening. The only person on earth who still writes them and can get away with it is Brandon Sanderson, and nobody else. You can't write
Mhm.
books that don't move the plot forward all the time. So
Yeah.
probably still there's a lot of authors that are inspired by Brandon Sanderson, so try to write like them and don't realize that publishers just aren't going to publish a new book by a new author that's 1,000 pages that takes
Mhm.
up so much space in a box, costs so much to print,
Mhm.
that they might not kind of consider. So you got to kind of keep it smaller and spelter and faster. So it's important, I think, to read modern fantasy, and just to see what people can do with voice. Like there's a book out there called Gideon the Ninth where the character speaks and like it jokes about and uses like memes and talks just exactly like someone you'd meet in college today. And it's just important to know that you can get away with that stuff if you want to, and you can kind of push boundaries and see other people pushing boundaries and know what's out there.
Mhm. Could you also apply that to like classic fantasy where you could say, hey, this was done in like the Wheel of Time or Lord of the Rings,
Mhm.
and I could bring this and maybe like modernize it in a way?
Totally, and see what you like about those things, like
Mhm.
character journeys and stuff like that. Yeah, there's a lot to learn from old stuff too, and you can even go further back into like Lord of the Rings is super old,
Mhm.
and there's some authors like a guy named Michael Moorcock,
Mhm.
who just wrote fantasy where anything could happen, and there wasn't even genres like sci-fi and fantasy back then. It was just that they might have called it speculative fiction. So it's just like you could be fighting a goblin one moment and then on a spaceship the next, and there was just no lines. So I think it's cool to just be able to open your mind like that and see that, once upon a time and perhaps even in the future, you can just don't worry about what genre you're writing, and just write whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Would you say like with the books you read, do you have like a top 5 like books all time that you think are your favorites?
Uh, yeah, it's hard to, I don't know if I'd
Like just
be
like
able
a
to pick
favorite
top five,
book.
but like off the top of my head, I mean, that Guy Gabriel Kay book that
Mm-hmm.
convinced me to become an author is called The Lord of Emperors. It's part two of a two-part series. The first one is called Sailing to Sarantium. So that one, um, The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. The first Ready Player One, it's not like the most beautifully eloquent book ever written,
Mm-hmm.
but it inspired me to write my book just because it was a book about, the guy loved video games and 80s culture so much. And it kind of made me just decide to write a book about things that I loved.
Mm-hmm.
More recently, like The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman is
I've
just an
heard a lot
incredible
about that
book.
one.
Oh man, his editor is my old editor, and when she sent
Mm-hmm.
me that book, I just bugged the heck out of my girlfriend. Every page, I was like, "Oh my god, listen to this! Oh my god, listen to this!" Because sometimes I read authors who they just maybe they just don't. They're more like they're plot focused and character focused, and they don't. I'm like a prose guy, even though I don't necessarily write the most eloquent prose. I do try, and I do like care about how many syllables are in a sentence, for instance. And when I read that book, I was like, this person cares about every single sentence, every single paragraph. It's just meticulous, and so I loved that book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's cool. I've heard a lot about the Black Tongue Thief
yeah,
specifically. A
yeah,
lot of book talkers or YouTubers that I follow say that one's really good. I've got to
yeah,
buy that one.
yeah.
And
It's
Lies
great,
of Blackmore, I've heard a
phenomenal.
lot about that. Yeah.
So good. And
Mm-hmm.
although Lies Loch Lamora is part of a longer series,
Mm-hmm.
you can read that book as a standalone and never have to read
Yeah.
another one. It's got the perfect ending. It's just
That's
a
what I've heard. Like a lot
masterpiece.
of those, it's like there's 3 books in the series, but they're all kind of like function as standalones
Totally.
in themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I kind of like the idea of like the standalone books, like, cause like, dude, getting into series, it's
Daunting.
just like I have like a Way of Kings on my shelf, and I started reading it
Yeah.
last night. I was like, I do not have time for a 1,000-page book right now. I'm
Yeah.
like, I need something short. I don't want to
Yeah.
go that. I'm like, and then the First Soul World, it's all because I just finished reading all the first Red Rising series books. And I was like,
Yeah.
I don't want to get into another 7 series books
Yeah.
right now. I just need something like easy to read. But yeah, those
Yeah. And it's nice when you can recommend a series to someone where the first book is feels complete, so that if they don't want to continue, they don't have to. So yeah.
Yeah, but yeah. So you said the Lord of Emperors was really good. What's like something that you really like about that book?
I mean, it was just unbelievably beautifully written. To me, it was Guy Gabriel Kay at like the top of his game. His work before that is very like raw, and his work after that, like I said, is very contemplative. And that book was like the pinnacle of those two things meeting. And it's just like stunningly beautiful. And even like in his most recent book, which just came out a month ago, he'll just mention Sarantium, like someone, because it takes place, like say after Lord of Emperors. He'll just mention Sarantium, or somebody going and walking the streets of Sarantium, which is the city, which is kind of like Byzantium, aka, which is modern day Constantinople. And I just tear up. Just seeing the word will make me tear up because I remember how beautiful that book was. And it's just so good.
So what would you say, we talked about Kings of the Wild, what would you say inspired you the most for Bloody Rose, and like how you wanted to take that story and those characters? You said Meatloaf was an inspiration for
Yeah,
that
Meatloaf,
band.
and just kind of 80s bands in general. Like
Mm-hmm.
when you see, like, say, like a 70s band be interviewed, even when they were in their prime, like Led Zeppelin getting interviewed, they're drinking tea, they're sitting by a
Yeah.
creek, they got their
Mm-hmm.
kids playing with them, and they're like rockers, but they were also just very down to earth, because they were the first people that kind of like reached that stratosphere of fame. Whereas then you move into the 80s, and if you watched an 80s band get interviewed in their prime, they would be like interviewing a group of monkeys, like on crack. Like they were just
Yeah.
crazy and destructive and egomaniacal and rude and crude. And so I was trying to like, and the 80s was almost like we can do everything louder and bigger and crazier. They put paint in their faces and making their hair crazy. Doing crazy stuff on stage. So I wanted to like move the world along into that and present a band that wasn't, didn't have their issues resolved, weren't even keeled, weren't regular normal people. They were like you know, their fame was everywhere around them, and they were caught up in their emotions. And so it definitely makes for characters that aren't as easily likable as the Kings of the Wyld characters, because those guys have, you know, matured. Whereas the characters in Bloody Rose are just a lot more crazy and wild, and yeah, driven by their more baser desires. So just kind of capture that, and then, like I said, listen to like things like Keith Richards' autobiography. Try to capture life on the road. And the main character in the second book, all these bands in my world have bards that follow them around, that kind of tell their stories and pump their tires and make them larger than life. And so I wanted to tell the story from the bard's point of view, which is kind of like, say there's like three classic stories in rock and roll. One is getting the band together, one is getting the band back together, and then one is like a rock journalist on the road with the band, kind of like the movie Almost Famous. So that was the second book, is like my version of that. So yeah, and just to see someone who idolized these people and then suddenly saw them up close and saw them kind of for the flawed people that they but the good, ultimately, people that they are.
I thought that was really interesting, the way like you chose kind of like, what was it with Clay and Tam? They're both kind of people that aren't going to be like really memorized by like history and that stuff, even though Tam got that, you know, nickname and all that. It kind of moved into being more of a mercenary at the end. But I thought it was interesting that you chose that way. What would you say, like, how you compared like Kings of the Wyld to the different band members, with Clay being bass, you know, Gannon the guitarist? What would you say you would compare them for Bloody Rose?
With Bloody Rose, it was more each one of them representing, because music kind of started to fracture a little bit, and then obviously even more in the 90s, and so much so after that that's not worth writing a book about. But in the 80s, they're kind of based on the genres of music. So Rose is kind of like the punk rock kind of character. Brune is kind of like the metalhead. He's got the long shaggy hair. Free Cloud is kind of like the pop, because he's just kind of, you know, clean and pristine and shiny. There's a character named Cura, who is like literally named after the band The Cure, who's kind of like gothy and dark. And then Tam is kind of like, there was still that music like The Journey, Stevie Nicks, Fleetwood Mac, that's kind of like got that wholesomeness to it. And so Tam kind of represents that. And even in the beginning, in the second chapter of the book, she takes a midnight train home, which is based off a Journey song. So or there's even someone calls her At the Edge of 17, which is a Stevie Nicks reference. So yeah, in that book, everyone kind of represents a genre.
I was loving all like the pop culture references you would put through it, with like Crime and Punishment. And then I think it was like my favorite one was the one about even bards get lucky with hitting a dragon every once in a while. I was like, that one's really good. I do have a question about one. In Compass, there's a place called Chapel Hill, and I am from North Carolina, and there is, you know, did you base it off that college or?
I did not know.
Oh, really? Because we have a college called UNC here, and the place is called Chapel Hill. I was like, that sounds familiar. And then I was like, I've got to ask him about that one.
But sometimes I forget the references just because there's so many in there. Like the name of if I ever needed a name for a town, a weapon, an airship, a mercenary, they were taken from, you know, rock bands or rock characters. So I do forget a lot of them, but not that one, unfortunately, is not intentional.
But so
good catch on the bard getting lucky with an arrow once.
I saw
I don't think a lot of people get that one.
I had read The Hobbit right before that. I was like, I got that one. So I think that might have helped me on that one. And that was interesting with like all the pop culture references. It was those little bits throughout it and that stuff. What would you say? I forgot what I was gonna ask. What would you say like the biggest you know, reference you pulled into it with like the different bands?
Well, I mean, there is, besides like the music references, like when there's like a big battle at the end of the first book, and there's just a lot of band references there. A lot of them too are kind of specifically Canadian. Like Neil Young, there's a Neil Young, Neil the Young, Neil the Old reference. There's a reference to a Tragically Hip song, which is funny because after Kings of the Wyld came out, when I was writing Bloody Rose, I was right near the end of it, and I was working. I had moved back to Ontario to be closer to my family, and I was still working in restaurants. And where I lived in a place called Kingston, where the band The Tragically Hip is from. And one of the band members came into my restaurant, and I served him and his family one night, and I didn't quite have the guts to tell him that I put a Tragically Hip reference into the book. But there's also just like movies that I love, like Dumb and Dumber. There's a
Mhm.
reference someone pointed out yesterday on social media. Um, there's references to movie like Say Anything. There's a couple Hobbit references in there. The band Rush has a lot of references in there. So
Mhm.
yeah, I like them all.
So, without avoiding too many spoilers, how did
Yeah.
you my favorite I think my favorite part in both of the books was that in battle in Bloody Rose, and I
Hmm.
really like the one in Case of the Wild. I felt I like Bloody Rose more as the second book,
Yeah.
and I felt like I liked the characters more. I really liked what was it, Barun and Free Cloud. Those
Yeah.
two are my favorite. And then in that second book, and it was like that battle, it felt just so epic in scope with the whole of Conthus versus the whole horde. How did you like come up with all that? Like, I want Conthus to be the end part and that stuff,
Yeah.
which like in the first book we didn't really focus on that. It was just like, we're in Conthus to go beat up the Booker
Yeah.
and then get out of there. And then like, so how did you come up with that, like, in battle in the second book?
Well, first of all, thanks for saying so. I really appreciate that you like the second book more, because I actually do like the second book more.
Mm, yeah.
I think a lot of people like Kings of the Wild more just because the characters are easier to like.
Mm,
Especially a lot of older dudes will like Kings of the Wild more because they relate to those characters,
mm,
and like I relate to those characters as someone who's getting older.
yeah.
But the characters in the second book are just so much more challenging to write. Like
Mm,
obviously the main character is nothing like me.
yeah.
So I think it's just more rewarding when you are able to pull that off and even make unlikable characters hopefully likable.
Mm,
Um, when it comes to the end of that book, I mean, I was just kind of winging it. I had a basic outline that I had written up when I first got my book deal, but you don't have to follow those. And I was just
mm,
kind of like, I, yeah, just I was kind of seeing where the story took me, and that includes like things like consequences and characters who die. I didn't plan for them to die. It was more just like, how am I going to get this to happen? How am I going to get this to happen? Okay, I need this person to be gone, and so that's kind of how it all came pretty organically. So I probably didn't decide on the end of the book till I was halfway through the book,
mm,
um, and then when it came to that final battle, like, yeah, I do. I love a good siege. I love a good city fight.
mm,
And funnily enough, like Meatloaf comes up again because I was starting to write the battle, and I had maybe put a Meatloaf song on social media or mentioned it, and someone goes, "Oh, I love the song Crying Out Loud." And I'd heard the song Crying Out Loud, but never really listened to it. And so I started to listen to it, and then I listened to it nonstop every day for like weeks. I would go to work and I would get like 5 listens of it in on the way to work, 5 on the way home. And the final climax of the final battle is written exactly to the second verse of Crying Out Loud by Meatloaf, right
mm.
down to like every single beat of the drum, every single tambourine, every single, you know, part of these things in the song is like word for word the dramatic beats of the final
Mhm.
battle. So
Yeah,
yeah, a lot of it was inspired by music.
yeah. I also love that part before the final battle with Contis. Like, they're facing this destruction, but it's such a crazy city. Like, we're just gonna party it out. Like,
Totally.
we might as well. I was like,
Yeah.
this is so well handled. And then that part where, what was it? I don't want to like, spoil anything, but where like, where Tam was singing
Yeah.
that song, I was
Yeah.
like, that was epic. And then that just completed her arc and
Yeah.
it just becoming that, new person kind of, I
Yeah.
think. But yeah, I thought that was
Yeah.
really cool.
Oh, I really, really appreciate that. That
Mm,
scene in particular was kind of inspired by. There's a version of U2 singing the song "One" that's
mm,
live, where they let the crowd sing with them,
mm.
and the crowd sings pretty much the whole song. And I was just like, "Oh man, how could I capture this sort of
Mm,
feeling in a book?" So that was my attempt
yeah,
at that.
yeah, that was sick. I really love that part. And so, how would you say, with I don't want to say it, but with this ending in the prologue,
Hmm.
like, how would you say that is that going to lead into your third book at all, or are you going to follow a completely new band? And what are the plans for the third book?
Well, the third book is called Outlaw Empire.
Hmm.
It takes place 14 years after the second book. Um, so things have changed quite drastically. There's a couple hints at the end of the second book as to how things might go if the worst were to happen. And so it's safe to say the worst does in fact happen. And so things are very, very different. Like the setting from the first book is quite different from the setting of the second book. And
Hmm.
the setting of the third book, the world just changed so much.
Hmm.
And it is, as I mentioned before, very inspired by 90s music. So a lot of grunge, a lot of hip hop, a lot of Rage Against the Machine. Not so much the NSYNC, although there'll probably be a couple of references in there for Backstreet Boys and such. But a lot of the music at that time was very like, it was a little angry, and it was kind of like mad at at society and like the injustices of a system that was oppressing people, whether it was grunge music kind of rebelling, or hip hop artists like Nas and stuff like that were like, this is what it's like to live in the hood, or this is what it's like to live in the inner city. This is what it's like to have the cops, who everyone else is like, oh, cops, we're safe, to see a cop and think, oh my God, I'm in trouble. Like, this is bad. So yeah, it's kind of inspired by that kind of music. So at the same time, it starts the story that Last Leaf began in the first book, and we'll have every character that's still alive from the first two books will be in the third book. Although I haven't written it yet, I've got the end and the final battle and everything all in my head and ready to go. So just a matter of getting it done.
So like saying, I have a guess about it. Like was saying, with like, the hood, being Nas in the hood and being afraid of the cops, is there going to be like, and like people being angry, are we going to explore more of the monsters side of thing with like the way Last Leaf picking up from his story in any way?
Last Leaf, like by the time this book rolls around, Last Leaf is basically like a folk hero, like someone who tried to help his own people and just did it in the wrong way. And so the band in the third book will be made up of both humans and monsters. In fact, in the first book, when they go to Five Court for the first time and get Gabriel's money from this kobold, which is another Hobbit reference, by the way, at the beginning of that chapter. It says it's like the hole in the ground that lived a hobbit kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, they go into that kobold's house, and he has kids, and one of the kids has a nest that's made up of weapons, and Gabriel says something, oh, that's Short Knife, he's a little off. And Short Knife is one of the main characters in book 3. He's in the band in book 3. He's on the cover of book 3. And so, yeah, he'll be, and he's a kobold. So it'll be both sides of the story. And ultimately about, people having to work together before the forces that want them to hate each other destroy them both.
Yeah. I did really enjoy in the second book about how, like, you were talking about, like, Last Leaf was to, like, the monsters, like, this hero. And, like, if he had just been, like, it might not have worked out for him, but, like, hey, if we can just, all live in peace and not just persecute us so much, and been better about that instead of going to, oh, I'm going to siege these people. But,
Totally.
that might have been like, hey, this is all we can do. They're just going to kill us anyways. Like, we're stuck in this forest that's actively eating us alive. And that's
and he was angry just from his past kind of made him and scarred him into something that was a bit more vengeful than was probably good. Yeah.
But I like in the first book, I was like, all right, I hate this dude. And then the second book painted him in more like a tragic light.
Yeah.
And especially with like Free Cloud. Like I was like, all right, I don't like the Jones in the first book. And then Free Cloud came in. I was like, I really like this character. And then that stuff. And I was like, that makes it. And I liked how you shine like more of a light in that stuff in the second book. We're like being in the North. I liked exploring the different parts of it. We're like going through the Heartwild and then to the Republic. And then being in the North and that stuff, I like that. Are you able to say what area we're going to be exploring this time, or is it going to be like the whole world?
I think probably all of it. I mean, especially the cities in general, just because that's where the bigger populations exist. And so, yeah, I'm hoping with this third one to kind of jet set around to go from city to city. By this point, at the end of the second book, that Drew and Conthus builds like thresholds in every city, so they can you can instantly portal from one city to another. So I'll probably try to make use of that and just have all the cities kind of feature in it somehow.
Now, would this be like a final book in a trilogy, or would there be like more books after this? Do you know if there will?
No, it'll definitely be the final book. There's definitely smaller, like in the same novellas and side stories I would do. Like I would love to write, I've talked about doing it in like maybe comic book form, like a Kira story, how she got all those tattoos, like what traumatized her. Any story involving Moog would be great. Kit, like there's lots of characters you could spin off. Ganelon, young Ganelon. But the story definitely ends. It kind of reaches a great arc, what I think is a great arc. And also just as far as like music eras, because of the internet coming along at the end of the 90s and kind of exploding everything, like everyone in the 70s, like listen to the same radio stations, watch much music, or like MTV. They got the same music from the same source. So it was like all the same. Whereas once you get to the 2000s, music's just there's too much of it. and there's no like just 2000s music that's as
Yeah.
evident as what 90s music was or what 80s music was or what 70s music was.
Yeah. You mentioned Ganellan, and like with at the end of the first book, he does something that I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. And you even like pointed that out in the writing.
Yeah.
Or is there a possibility we'll see him again in this third book? Because I noticed
100%.
something. Yeah. Because I noticed something in the second book where like Larkspur said, and just looked at Clay, and Clay was like, good luck, go getting him.
Yeah.
And then it did that and that stuff. I was like, okay, hopefully we'll see him again. He was a character I liked. And that stuff.
You absolutely will see him again.
But yeah, that's good. But yeah, man, thank you for coming on the podcast today. It was great having you and for shining a light on these books. I loved these books, and Kings of the Wild was the first fantasy book I read this year, and really the first fantasy book other than the Percy Jackson books I read 10 years ago that I really got into, and I really enjoyed them. And I just have one more question for like, I'm an aspiring writer. I would love to be an author one day. And do you have any advice for people trying to get into writing?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for all those kind words. I really, really appreciate it. That's great that you're back into reading and writing too. I mean, I think the process of writing in general just like helps you as a person because you're exploring yourself, what you think about subjects, what you think about people. You're putting yourself into the heads of other people and other characters who might be different from you, especially, say when I was writing that second book. So it just helps, like, whether or not anyone gets published in the end, the process of writing is so integral to building empathy. It doesn't always work. There's some jerks out there, but yeah, I think it's just a great process in general, a worthy process. But then, reading and just honestly, just working, writing. And like, Brandon Sanderson's got tons of great advice. He has so many, like, everyone can learn from him, whether or not you want to write a book that's like his or not. But yeah, just ultimately you kind of just got to practice and get better, edit lots. Like my brother is also an aspiring author, and he recently wrote like a novella and gave it to me. And I lovingly tore it to shreds. I was like, this, you got to change this paragraph, and I edited it the way I edit my own work, which is extremely thoroughly. And because he's seen me go through this process, he knows that I'm not just trying to like, crush him. He knows that I'm trying to make him better. And so he was like, okay, I'm going to take all these characters, I'm going to start fresh, but I'm going to do every edit you said, and I'm going to learn from how I do those edits. And like, so editing your own work is like pretty integral as well. And yeah, just keep at it. And ultimately finding your own voice is what worked for me, because I tried to emulate my favorite authors. And although I learned a lot from them, like I said before, writing a book that only you could write. You could give Brandon Sanderson the idea of mercenaries as rock bands, and his book wouldn't be the same as mine. So yeah, just know that whatever you write will be unique to yourself. And if you're butting your head against the wall and you're not finding an agent, look into self-publishing. And although it is more like difficult, because you have to like, say, get an author, get someone to do your title font and editor and stuff like that, it can be immensely rewarding. And to be fair, like a mediocre selling self-published author probably makes 10 times as much as a mediocre selling published author. Those people are rich.
I'll see like people on like Instagram, and they've got like, I don't know, they've got X amount of followers, but they're self-published. I'm like, I wonder how much money they're making off of that, because they're just getting most of the money back themselves. It's like they don't have anybody in between, and that's
totally. They're making like 70% of their sales is them, whereas I think with me, obviously, for like a regular book, it's like 11 or 13%.
But like with even that, I was like, I wouldn't want to have to go through all that marketing and that stuff. I just need somebody to do it for me. But
and I think lastly too, which I did mention before, is just to like enjoy your life outside of writing. Don't let everything, your other things in your relationships especially, slip away while you're trying to fulfill this dream, because still once it comes true, if it comes true, you're still going to have to manage the rest of your life. And you're still going to have, like I said, I worked in restaurants for 2 years after I got published, because you don't get filthy rich right away. You don't get filthy rich really at any time. But just important to like enjoy the rest of your life and not put every single egg in that writing basket, and have it as something that you love, not just something you're depending on to change your life.
That was like something I struggled with a little bit, because I was like, all right, I'm trying to run a YouTube channel. I've got to read. I can't be writing, like trying to do 5 hours a day and going to the gym and hang out with friends and that stuff. And one of the like the main things I help like pull with my writing, especially with like or trying to learn how to write, is like with dialogue. I'd be like, all right, how do I talk with my friends?
Yeah.
How do I talk with my girlfriend, my parents, all this stuff, and just draw that and just try and be like natural that way.
Yeah.
That stuff. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that's where reading comes into a lot too, like
Mhm.
just seeing what that sentence structure looks like
Yeah.
and kind of paying attention to it, because I listen to a lot of audiobooks and my brother does too. And I had to kind of tell him, I'm like, you need to go back and read some books,
Mhm.
as opposed to just audiobook, because you need to see what dialogue looks like and like make
Yeah.
sure you nail it.
This was like
So
when I had those 40 pages, I was like, I would do like a 3 paragraph long descriptions of this
yeah,
character, and I'd be
yeah,
like, that doesn't really work right now. And then I
yeah,
learned, I was reading some other books and I was like, okay, these guys are describing them in the moment, doing it like bits at a time. I was
yeah,
like, that's got to be the best way it works. And so that's like, it's just reading. That's what's helped me most. Like, I'll just learn by just like reading from like you, from like authors like James Islington and Pierce
yeah,
Brown and all those other guys. That's the way I'm like just pulling information. And that's like, if I keep this, I'm gonna try and keep this podcast going. And like,
yeah,
I just like, I always want that main question to be, what's advice that you can give to other people? What's
yeah,
advice you can give to everybody else? But
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think you'll find that a lot of authors, absolutely jump at the chance to be on a podcast, whether it's
Mm,
like to either get their work out there or just to pass on what they know to other people, because they know how fortunate they are, like how fortunate they are to be in the position that they are.
mm,
So yeah, anytime if you have questions about the industry, or
mm.
anyone out there listening, feel free to like ask me on social media, and I'm happy
Yeah.
to answer
Thanks, man,
questions.
a lot. Thank you
Of
for the
course,
podcast, by the way. Guys, if y'all
my
haven't read
pleasure.
these 2 books, go pick them up. They're great. And thank you, Nicholas. This was awesome. I've always wanted to do a podcast. When I started out YouTube, I was like, I want to get a podcast. I want to shine light on authors and, people in the book industry and that stuff.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to do. So when I got that text from you saying yes, I was like, yes. I was like, this is awesome.
Awesome. I'm happy to
But
hear
yeah,
it.
yeah. Thank you, man. And thank you for coming out. I hope you have a good rest of your day, man.
You too.
All right. Thank you.